Right now, at every garden center in America, a bright green and white bag sits on the shelf. It costs about $5. It promises lush tomatoes, vibrant roses, greener peppers. Millions of gardeners buy it every single season, and almost none of them know they may be quietly poisoning the very plants they are trying to save. That bag is Epsom salt, and university researchers have known for decades what the fertilizer industry has buried. Epsom salt is just magnesium sulfate. 10% magnesium, 13% sulfur. That is it. No nitrogen, no phosphorus, no potassium, nothing your garden actually needs to grow. Tom Kalb at North Dakota State University Extension has said it plainly. Applying Epsom salt to the wrong soil does not help your plants. It hurts them. And then the fertilizer industry kept printing the words plant food right on the label anyway. Let's get one thing straight from the beginning. A fertilizer feeds your plants. That is the definition. And when scientists talk about feeding plants, they mean three things above everything else: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Those are the big three. The NPK you see on every legitimate fertilizer label. They drive leaf growth, root development, flowering, fruiting. They are the foundation. Epsom salt contains none of them, not a trace. Zero nitrogen, zero phosphorus, zero potassium. What it does contain is magnesium and sulfur, two secondary nutrients that plants need in much smaller amounts. Calling Epsom salt a fertilizer is like calling a glass of water a meal. Technically you consume something, but you are still going to starve. Plants need 17 essential nutrients to survive and thrive. Epsom salt supplies exactly 2 of them, and yet bags of it sit in the fertilizer aisle, right next to actual plant food, labeled as though they belong there. The industry knows this. They label it plant food anyway, because a confused gardener is a repeat customer. That business model has been running for decades, and it has been running on the backs of gardeners who trusted the label more than they trusted a soil test. But the label was never the whole story. The whole story starts in a hot July garden in front of a tomato plant that is dying in a way its owner does not yet understand. Epsom salt's reputation as a garden remedy would later become the exact thing that caused millions of gardeners to make their tomato problems dramatically worse. But in the 1990s, it was just a cheap folk cure passed down at backyard fences, repeated in gardening newsletters, printed in the margins of seed catalogues. It felt like wisdom. It felt like something your grandmother would know, and that feeling of inherited knowledge made it almost impossible to question. Nobody asked for a citation. Nobody demanded a soil test. The advice moved through communities the way all comfortable myths move, on the current of trust, not evidence. Here is the scene. It is a hot July afternoon. The air smells like warm soil and green leaves and the faint sweetness of tomato vines baking in the sun. A gardener walks out to check the plants. The fruits are forming. Everything looks promising. The cages are full. The vines are climbing. There is that particular stillness that comes over a garden in the middle of a summer afternoon when the bees have gone quiet and the heat presses down on every leaf. And then they see it. Dark, sunken, leathery patches spreading across the bottom of the tomatoes. Black rot eating through the flesh from the blossom end upward. The skin has collapsed inward like something deflated it from inside. The tissue underneath is brown and wet and wrong. The gardener crouches down and touches the damaged fruit. It is soft where it should be firm. The surface feels almost papery at the edges of the rot and slick at the center. The smell is faintly sweet and faintly wrong, the smell of something that should have been food but will not be. The rot is spreading to the next tomato on the same vine, and the one below that, and there, on the plant in the next cage, the same dark patch is just beginning to form at the tip of a fruit that looked perfect 2 days ago. The gardener counts the damaged tomatoes. 7, 8, 12. The panic sets in fast. They pull out their phone, or maybe an old gardening book with a cracked spine and pencil notes in the margins, and they find the same answer everywhere: blossom end rot. And right next to the diagnosis, the cure. Epsom salt. Apply it as a foliar spray. Mix it into the soil. Dissolve 2 tablespoons per gallon of water and drench the root zone. The advice is everywhere. On gardening forums, in YouTube comments, in articles that have been copied and pasted so many times nobody remembers where they started. The gardener drives to the garden center, buys the $5 bag, goes home and applies it immediately, mixes the white crystals into a gallon jug, watches them dissolve into clear water. carries the jug out to the garden in the evening heat when the shadows are long and the soil is still warm from the afternoon sun. Pours it carefully around the base of each plant, working methodically down the row, making sure every root zone gets a thorough soaking. The white powder disappears into the dark soil without a trace. The gardener stands back and looks at the garden. Feels like they did something. Feels like they solved it. The bag is empty. The jug is empty. The tomatoes are still rotting. But the gardener does not know that yet. They go inside and wash their hands and feel, for the first time all day, like the problem is behind them. They did not solve it, they made it worse. Here is what blossom end rot actually is. It is a calcium deficiency disorder. The plant is not getting enough calcium to the developing fruit cells. Those cells collapse. They die. They turn black and leathery. That is blossom end rot. Calcium, not magnesium. Calcium. An Epsom salt contains exactly 0 calcium. Not a small amount. 0. So when a gardener applies Epsom salt to a plant suffering from blossom end rot, they are not treating the deficiency. They are adding a nutrient the plant does not need more of, in a situation where the plant is already struggling to absorb the one nutrient it desperately needs. But it gets worse. What comes next is the part that still does not make sense to most gardeners until you understand the chemistry. Magnesium and calcium are both positively charged ions. They compete for the same uptake sites on plant roots. When you flood the soil with extra magnesium, you are not just adding a nutrient, you are blocking the pathway that calcium uses to enter the plant. The roots can only absorb so much at once. Magnesium is aggressive. It pushes calcium out of the queue, so the plant that was already calcium deficient becomes even more calcium deficient. The blossom end rot that was already spreading gets worse. Tom Kalb, horticulture specialist at North Dakota State University Extension, has stated this directly in university research publications. Adding Epsom salt to soils that already have adequate magnesium levels can increase the incidence of blossom end rot in tomatoes, not decrease it, increase it. The cure that millions of gardeners reach for every single summer is, in the wrong conditions, accelerating the exact problem they are trying to fix. Think about the scale of this. Tomatoes are the most popular home garden vegetable in the United States. The National Gardening Association estimates that over 35 million households grow vegetables at home. A significant portion of those households grow tomatoes. Blossom end rot is one of the most common tomato problems those gardeners encounter. And the most widely shared, most repeated, most trusted piece of advice for treating it is to apply a product that contains none of the nutrient causing the problem and actively interferes with the absorption of the nutrient that would actually fix it. Millions of applications, every single summer, making things worse. And the gardeners do not know. They apply the Epsom salt. The blossom end rot continues. They assume they did not use enough. They apply more. The problem persists or worsens. They blame the weather. They blame the variety. They blame bad luck. The bag gets bought again next season. The cycle resets. The industry profits. The tomatoes keep rotting. Here is what makes this particularly maddening. Calcium deficiency in tomatoes is almost never caused by a lack of calcium in the soil. Most garden soils have plenty of calcium. The problem is uptake. Inconsistent watering is the #1 cause of blossom end rot. When soil moisture fluctuates wildly, soaking wet one day, bone dry the next, the plant cannot move calcium efficiently through its vascular system to the developing fruit. The calcium is there. The plant just cannot transport it fast enough. The fix is consistent watering, mulching to retain moisture, sometimes a soil pH adjustment to improve calcium availability. Not Epsom salt, never Epsom salt. But the bag is $5. It is right there on the shelf. It has been recommended by a neighbor, a gardening blog, a YouTube video with 400,000 views. The advice feels authoritative. It feels proven. It has the weight of tradition behind it. That tradition is costing gardeners their tomato crops, and the calcium-magnesium competition in your soil would come back to haunt every gardener who over-applies Epsom salt season after season. But that is getting ahead of the story. The soil is a battlefield. Nutrients compete for the same narrow entry points into plant roots. The stakes are invisible to the naked eye, but the consequences show up on every leaf, every stem, every dying tomato plant in your garden, and the Epsom salt bag never mentions any of it. Here is what the bag never tells you. Plant roots absorb nutrients through a system called cation exchange. Cations are positively charged ions: magnesium, calcium, potassium. They all carry a positive charge. They all want the same receptor sites on the root surface, and there are only so many receptor sites to go around. When one cation floods the system, the others get crowded out. It is not a metaphor. It is electrochemistry. It is physics. It is happening in your raised bed right now every time you dissolve that white powder into your watering can and carry it out to the garden thinking you are helping. The technical term is cation competition. University of Massachusetts Extension documented it in a 2019 soil fertility report. The report found that excess magnesium in soil directly suppresses calcium and potassium uptake in vegetable crops, particularly in solanaceous plants, tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, the very plants Epsom salt is most aggressively marketed toward. If that sounds bad, keep watching. Here is where it gets worse. A gardener amends their soil in spring. They add lime for calcium. They add compost for potassium. They work it in carefully with a fork, turning each section of bed until the amendments are fully incorporated, raking the surface smooth, watering it in slowly so the lime begins to dissolve and the compost starts to break down into the soil structure. They let it settle for 2 weeks before transplanting. They do everything right. They have read the extension guides. They have followed the recommendations. Then they read a gardening forum in June and decide to spray Epsom salt on their tomatoes because the leaves look a little pale. They dissolve 2 tablespoons per gallon. They apply it every 2 weeks like the forum post suggested, standing in the garden with a spray bottle, coating the undersides of the leaves the way the post said to do it, being thorough, being careful. The white mist settles onto the leaf surfaces and dries in the afternoon heat, leaving a faint crystalline residue on the darkest leaves. By July, the blossom end rot is back. The lower leaves are yellowing. The fruit is misshapen and small. They cannot figure out why. Their soil has calcium. Their soil has potassium. They added both. But the magnesium they poured in is sitting in every receptor site on every root hair in that bed, blocking the calcium and potassium from entering the plant at all. The calcium is in the soil, the potassium is in the soil. The plant cannot access either one. The gardener is standing in a garden full of nutrients their plants are starving for. The University of Vermont Extension Service published a soil amendment guide in 2021 that specifically warned against Epsom salt applications in soils that had not been tested for existing magnesium levels. Their data showed that in soils already at adequate magnesium levels, which, as we will get to shortly, is most home garden soils, adding Epsom salt raised magnesium concentrations high enough to measurably suppress calcium uptake within a single growing season. One season, one bag, enough to undo an entire spring of careful soil preparation. The old-timers had a rule. Fix one nutrient without testing the others, and you create 2 new problems. It sounds like folk wisdom. It is actually soil science. Every nutrient exists in a ratio relationship with every other nutrient. Magnesium and calcium compete directly. Potassium and magnesium compete directly. High phosphorus locks out zinc and iron. High iron locks out manganese. The soil is not a simple container you fill up. It is a dynamic system of competing chemical relationships, and every time you add something without testing, you are pulling one thread in a sweater and hoping the whole thing does not unravel. The gardener standing in their July garden, staring at blossom end rot they cannot explain, is holding the unraveled sweater, and they are still holding the empty Epsom salt bag. In 2018, a research team at Cornell University's Department of Horticulture ran a controlled trial on magnesium supplementation in tomato production. They divided plots into 3 groups. One group received no supplemental magnesium. One group received magnesium sulfate, Epsom salt, at the rate commonly recommended in home gardening guides. One group received a balanced amendment based on soil test results. The researchers monitored soil chemistry, plant tissue levels, and fruit quality metrics across the entire growing season. They measured calcium concentrations in developing fruit at 2-week intervals, taking tissue samples and sending them to the lab, tracking the numbers as the season progressed. They tracked the incidence of blossom end rot week by week, walking each plot and counting damaged fruit, photographing the progression of the damage, recording the percentage of the total crop affected. They weighed the harvests at the end of the season and compared the numbers across all 3 groups. By the end of the growing season, the Epsom salt group showed the highest incidence of calcium-related disorders, including blossom end rot. Despite having soil calcium levels that were adequate at the start of the trial, the balanced amendment group had the lowest incidence. The control group, the one that received nothing, outperformed the Epsom salt group on fruit quality metrics. The group that did nothing performed better than the group that followed popular gardening advice. That result sat in a university research archive. It did not make the front page of any gardening magazine. It did not go viral on Instagram. The Epsom salt recommendation kept spreading. The marketing kept running. The blog posts kept circulating. The advice kept spreading through gardening communities with the confidence of established fact. And gardeners kept looking at their yellowing leaves and reaching the same wrong conclusion. Because here is the trap. Intervenal chlorosis, yellowing between the leaf veins, while the veins themselves stay green, is a real magnesium deficiency symptom. It is textbook. It is in every horticulture manual. But it is not only a magnesium deficiency symptom. Iron deficiency causes intervenal chlorosis. Zinc deficiency causes intervenal chlorosis. Manganese deficiency causes it. Sulfur deficiency causes it. Even overwatering can produce leaf yellowing patterns that look identical to magnesium deficiency to an untrained eye. A gardener who sees intervenal chlorosis and immediately reaches for Epsom salt is not diagnosing, they are guessing, and that guess has a cost. $5 for the bag, another $5 next season, another $5 the season after that, plus the cost of the calcium and potassium deficiency the excess magnesium creates, plus the cost of the fruit loss from blossom end rot that the Epsom salt made worse, plus the cost of the soil amendment needed to correct the magnesium surplus after years of over-application. A $5 bag of Epsom salt, applied without diagnosis, can generate $50 in downstream problems over a 3-year period. The math is not complicated. The industry just prefers you do not do it. The damage compounds season after season. Magnesium accumulates in soil. It does not disappear between growing seasons. A gardener who applies Epsom salt every year for 5 years is not just crowding out calcium this season. They are building a magnesium surplus that will suppress calcium and potassium uptake for years after they stop. The problem they created outlasts the habit that created it. Everything the well-intentioned gardener had built, the amended beds, the careful composting, the lime applications, the balanced fertilizer, was working against them, and they had no idea, because the bag never told them to test first. It never told them that the soil has a memory, that every application leaves a residue, that the chemistry they set in motion in April is still running in October, still running the following May, still running 3 seasons later when they cannot understand why their plants look worse every year despite everything they are doing to help them. The garden center is quiet on a Tuesday morning in March. The seed packets are still fully stocked. The soil amendments line the back wall. The bags of Epsom salt are stacked 3 deep on the bottom shelf, right at eye level when you crouch down to read the labels, which is exactly where the merchandising team put them. A gardener stands in the aisle, reading the back of an Epsom salt bag, convinced their plants need it. They have not tested their soil. They have not looked up the actual prevalence of magnesium deficiency in home gardens. They are operating on assumption. The bag is warm from sitting near the heating vent. The label is clean and bright. The words plant food are printed in large green letters, and that assumption is about to cost them. Here is the number the fertilizer industry does not put on the bag. According to data compiled from cooperative extension soil testing programs across the United States, the majority of home garden soils test at adequate or high magnesium levels, not borderline, not marginal, adequate or high. The University of Maine Cooperative Extension, which processes thousands of home garden soil samples annually, reported in their 2022 summary that fewer than 12% of submitted home garden samples showed magnesium levels low enough to warrant supplementation. 12%, that means 88% of gardeners reaching for Epsom salt are treating a deficiency that does not exist in their soil. Kevin Espiritu of Epic Gardening, one of the most widely followed independent horticultural educators in the United States, ran informal trials across multiple growing seasons and multiple soil types at his San Diego test garden. His conclusion, published in a 2022 video and accompanying written guide, was direct. Most home garden soils, particularly those amended with compost or organic matter, do not lack magnesium. The mineral is present in most organic matter. It is present in most municipal water supplies. It is present in most commercial potting mixes. The gardener who composts, who adds aged manure, who uses a balanced granular fertilizer, is almost certainly not magnesium deficient. They are magnesium sufficient, possibly magnesium excess, and they are about to make it worse. Sandy soils are the exception. Container soils are the exception. Heavily leached soils in high rainfall regions are the exception. These are the conditions where magnesium deficiency is genuinely more common, where the mineral washes out faster than plants can absorb it, where supplementation has a legitimate scientific basis. These are the conditions where Epsom salt, used carefully and in measured doses based on an actual soil test, can produce a real and measurable benefit. A gardener growing in sandy coastal soil in Georgia, where heavy summer rains leach magnesium out of the root zone faster than tomato roots can chase it down, may genuinely need supplementation. A gardener growing in a container on a balcony, where the potting mix has been watered daily for 3 months and the magnesium has flushed out through the drainage holes, may genuinely need supplementation. These situations are real. These gardeners deserve accurate information. But these specific conditions affect a minority of home gardeners. They are not the default. They are not the assumption. And the Epsom salt bag does not tell you to check whether your soil falls into these categories before you open it. It does not say test first. It does not say only if deficient. It says plant food. It implies universal benefit. It implies that every garden, every soil, every plant will respond positively. That implication is false, and the industry knows it. The gardener in the sandy coastal soil of Georgia has a different situation than the gardener in the clay loam soil of central Ohio. The gardener growing in 5-gallon buckets has a different situation than the gardener growing in a raised bed filled with 3 years of composted kitchen scraps. Treating them all with the same blanket recommendation is not gardening advice. It is product marketing dressed up as gardening advice. It is a $5 solution to a problem most of the people buying it do not have. The assumption of deficiency without a soil test is a guess. It is a guess that costs money. It is a guess that risks soil health. It is a guess that the fertilizer industry profits from every single time a gardener makes it. And it is a guess that has been made tens of millions of times in American gardens over the past 30 years, in raised beds and container gardens and backyard plots, by well-meaning people who trusted a label over a laboratory. The 12% of gardeners who actually need magnesium supplementation deserve accurate information. So do the 88% who do not. Both groups deserve to know what is actually in their soil before they start adding things to it. Both groups deserve to know that a $15 soil test from their local cooperative extension office will tell them more about what their garden needs than any bag on any shelf in any garden center in the country. The test comes back as a printed report. It lists your soil, pH, your nitrogen levels, your phosphorus, your potassium, your calcium, your magnesium. It tells you what is low, what is adequate, what is high. It tells you exactly what to add and how much. It tells you what to stop adding. It is the most useful document a home gardener can own, and most gardeners have never ordered one. Most gardeners have spent more money on Epsom salt in a single season than a soil test would have cost them. Most gardeners have spent more time troubleshooting problems the Epsom salt created than it would have taken to mail a small bag of dirt to a laboratory and wait 2 weeks for the results. The soil test was always the answer. It was always the tool that separated the gardeners who fixed their problems from the gardeners who compounded them. It was always available. It was always affordable. It costs less than 3 bags of Epsom salt. It takes 2 weeks to get results. It tells you exactly what your soil has, exactly what it lacks, and exactly what to add. No guessing, no competing ions, no unraveled sweater, just information, just science, just the truth about what your plants actually need. The gardener who gets the test back and sees adequate magnesium levels already present in their soil is the gardener who does not buy the bag. The gardener who sees low calcium is the gardener who adds lime, adjusts their watering schedule, mulches the root zone, and watches the blossom end rot disappear by midsummer. Not because they found a miracle product, because they found the actual problem. A $15 soil test, a $5 bag of Epsom salt. One of these tells you what your soil actually needs. The other one guesses. One of them has been sitting on the shelf at your garden center for 30 years, marketed as plant food, sold to gardeners who trusted the label. The other one has been sitting at your local cooperative extension office waiting for you to ask for it. Test the soil, stop guessing.